The humid air of Port Royal, Jamaica, hung thick with the scent of salt, rum, and decay. The year was 1690, a time when the British Crown held a precarious grip on the Caribbean, and the line between privateer and pirate was as blurred as the horizon on a foggy morning. 12-year-old Elias, a boy with sun-bleached hair and eyes that held the weight of 1,000 storms, huddled in the shadow of a warehouse. His ribs were a painful map beneath his tattered shirt, a testament to a life spent begging and scavenging. He watched the soldiers of the British Royal Navy, their red coats stark against the vibrant chaos of the port. They were laughing, their voices a cruel symphony that grated on his nerves. One of them, a man with a scarred face and a sneer that seemed permanently etched on his lips, kicked a half-eaten loaf of bread towards him. "Here, little rat," he jeered, "a feast for a king." The other soldiers roared with laughter, their amusement a blade twisting in Elias's gut. He was a starved orphan, a familiar sight in these parts, but that didn't lessen the sting of their cruelty. As he reached for the bread, his hand trembled, not just from hunger but from a deep, simmering rage. He was tired of being a spectacle, of being nothing more than a plaything for men who had everything. Just as his fingers brushed the crust, a heavy boot stomped down on the bread, grinding it into the dirt. The soldiers' laughter intensified. "Thought you'd get it that easy, eh?" A new voice, low and commanding, cut through the noise. "That's enough, lads." The soldiers, still chuckling, turned to face the newcomer. He was a man of impressive stature, clad in a long leather coat that was worn but well maintained. His dark hair was tied back in a loose knot, and his eyes, a piercing shade of grey, held a quiet authority. This was Captain Liam, the Swift O'Connell, a name whispered in both taverns and governors' mansions. He was known for his ruthless efficiency in battle and a code of honour that was, for a pirate, surprisingly rigid. "Captain O'Connell," the scarred soldier said, his mockery replaced by a forced respect. "Just having a bit of fun." Liam's gaze was fixed on Elias, a silent assessment passing between them. He saw not a beggar, but a flicker of defiance in the boy's eyes. "Fun at the expense of a child is no fun at all," Liam said, his voice flat. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch, tossing it to the scarred soldier. "For the trouble of my lecture." The soldier's eyes widened at the weight of the pouch, and his sneer finally vanished, replaced by a greedy grin. Liam then turned his attention back to Elias. "Boy, what's your name?" "Elias," the boy managed, his voice a dry rasp. "Elias," Liam repeated, as if tasting the name. "You look like you haven't eaten in a week." Before Elias could respond, Liam crouched down, his movements surprisingly fluid for a man of his size. He pulled a piece of salted beef and a hard biscuit from a satchel on his belt, offering them to Elias. The boy hesitated, wary of another trick, but Liam's expression was genuine, free of the cruel amusement he had just witnessed. Slowly, Elias took the food, his eyes never leaving the captain's. "Come aboard my ship," Liam said, his voice a low rumble. "You can work for your keep. A life of begging is no life for a man, even a small one." Elias didn't need to be told twice. He nodded, a single decisive motion. He had nothing to lose and a chance, however slim, to escape the crushing poverty that had been his only reality. He followed Liam through the bustling streets of Port Royal, the sound of the soldiers' jeers fading into the distance, replaced by the rhythmic clatter of the port and the promise of a different life. He boarded the Sea Serpent, a ship that, despite its worn sails and patched hull, felt more like a home than any place he had ever known. Life aboard the Sea Serpent was a stark contrast to the streets of Port Royal. Elias was no longer a starved orphan. He was Elias, the new cabin boy. The crew, a motley group of weathered men from all corners of the world, were a rough but surprisingly kind family. They taught him the ropes, literally. He learned to coil lines, swab the deck, and navigate the treacherous rigging. He was clumsy at first, his thin frame struggling with the physical demands, but he was a quick study. Liam, however, remained a mystery. He was a man of few words, a quiet captain who observed more than he spoke. He treated Elias with a detached fairness, neither coddling him nor demanding more than he could give. But in his quiet moments, Elias noticed Liam watching him, a thoughtful, almost paternal look on his face. He felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before, a feeling that blossomed into a quiet respect and admiration for the man who had saved him. The routine was broken by a sudden, violent storm. The sky, a perfect Caribbean blue just hours before, turned a menacing grey. Waves, the size of mountains, crashed against the ship, tossing it around like a toy. Elias, clinging to the mast, was terrified. He had never seen such a tempest. The wind shrieked, a high-pitched wail that seemed to carry the voices of the damned. He lost his footing, his grip slipping on the wet wood. He felt a sickening lurch as he fell, his mind screaming in terror. He was caught. A strong, calloused hand wrapped around his arm, pulling him back against the mast. It was Liam. The captain's face was grim, his jaw set against the force of the wind and rain. "Hold on, boy!" he shouted over the roar of the storm. Elias, tears of fear and relief streaming down his face, clung to Liam's arm. The captain didn't let go, not even when a rogue wave crashed over the deck, soaking them both to the bone. He held on until the worst of the storm had passed, his grip a reassuring anchor in the chaos. When the storm finally subsided, leaving behind a sky of bruised purples and oranges, Liam led Elias to his cabin. He pulled out a flask of rum, pouring a small amount into a mug and offering it to the boy. "For the nerves," he said, a small, rare smile gracing his lips. Elias took a hesitant sip, the strong liquor burning a trail down his throat. "Thank you, Captain," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You saved me." "You held on," Liam corrected, his grey eyes meeting Elias's. "I just helped you. A man must always be willing to help those who are willing to help themselves." That night, for the first time in his life, Elias felt a glimmer of hope, not just for survival, but for a future. The mocking echoes of the soldiers were a distant memory, replaced by the steady rhythm of the waves and the quiet presence of the man who had given him a new name, a new purpose, and a new life. The Sea Serpent became a sanctuary, a floating island of found family. Elias, now a young man of 15, was no longer a boy, but an integral part of the crew. He had grown stronger, his body lean and agile, and his eyes, once filled with desperation, now held a fierce, determined spark. Liam had not only taught him how to survive at sea, but also how to read, navigate by the stars, and understand the complex world of diplomacy and trade. Elias had become Liam's right-hand man, the one the captain trusted most. He knew the ship's every creak and groan, the way the wind whispered through the sails, and the subtle shifts in Liam's mood. A raised eyebrow, a slight tension in his shoulders that signaled trouble long before it arrived. Their peaceful existence was shattered when they encountered the Dominion, a British naval frigate commanded by Captain Edward Finch, the very man with the scarred face who had mocked Elias in Port Royal. Finch had risen in the ranks, his cruelty now a tool of the crown. The air was thick with tension, not just from the coming battle, but from the spectre of Elias's past. The Dominion was larger, faster, and better armed, a floating fortress of polished oak and glinting brass cannons. Liam knew this was a fight they couldn't win. He ordered the crew to prepare for a swift escape, the sails to be trimmed, and the course set for the treacherous reefs they knew so well. But as they tried to maneuver away, a cannonball from the Dominion struck the Sea Serpent's hull, a splintering crash that sent a tremor through the ship. The deck beneath Elias's feet bucked violently, and he watched in slow motion as Liam was knocked off his feet, his head striking the mast with a sickening thud. He lay still, a thin trail of blood trickling from his temple, a stark patch of red against the grimy deck. Panic erupted. The crew, seeing their captain fall, lost their focus. The Dominion was closing in, its cannons roaring a deafening challenge. Elias's heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear and fury. He couldn't lose Liam, not after everything. The man who had seen more than a starved orphan who had given him a purpose was now a hair's breadth from death. Elias looked at the chaos around him, at the faces of his friends, the helmsman paralyzed by fear, the gunners staring at the fallen captain, and he knew he had to act. "Stop!" Elias's voice, a surprising shout of authority, cut through the noise. "Listen to me. We can still outrun them. Trim the sails. Now!" His voice, so filled with conviction and the echoes of Liam's own quiet authority, was enough to snap the crew out of their fear. They followed his orders, their movements a synchronized dance of desperation and efficiency. Elias, with the help of a few men, carried the unconscious Liam to the medical bay, then raced back to the deck. He took the wheel, his hands gripping the wood with a newfound strength. He could almost feel Liam's presence beside him, guiding his actions. The battle raged on. The Sea Serpent, despite its damage, was a nimble ship. Elias, using the knowledge Liam had imparted, expertly navigated the vessel, weaving through the treacherous currents, making their ship a difficult target. Finch, on the Dominion, was a picture of frustrated rage, his scarred face twisted in a snarl. He fired volley after volley, the cannonballs kicking up geysers of water around them, but the Sea Serpent was too fast, too unpredictable. It was a duel of wits, and Elias, with every turn of the wheel, proved he was a student worthy of his teacher. As they finally broke free from the British frigate's pursuit, a ragged cheer erupted from the crew. But the victory was bittersweet. Liam was still unconscious, his life hanging by a thread. The doctor on board, a gruff but skilled man, had done what he could, but it was now a waiting game. Elias, kneeling beside the captain's bed, held his hand, his eyes filled with unshed tears. He whispered, "Captain, wake up," his voice trembling with a vulnerability he hadn't shown since he was a boy on the docks of Port Royal. Liam's eyes fluttered open, his grey gaze a little hazy. He looked at Elias, then at the relieved faces of the crew gathered around him. A small smile, weary but proud, touched his lips. "You did it, Elias," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You saved us." Elias, the boy who was once mocked for his hunger, had not only saved his captain and his family, but he had also found his place in the world. He had learned that true strength wasn't about a sword or a pistol, but about the bonds of loyalty and love. The boy who was nothing was now everything to the people who had given him a home. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to our channel for more exciting adventures.